Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this late afternoon session on competitiveness and open source in the automotive industry. I hope you'll stick with us as we get closer to the end of today's jam-packed schedule. Really appreciate you all making the time. So, I first learned about open source in the automotive industry about a year and a half ago when I helped get Mercedes-Benz to join our summit last year as a flagship sponsor. And what I've learned since then is that the automotive industry is leading the way for open source in Europe. So I don't want to question any of that assumption, and I don't want to go into all the details and statistics of why that's the case or anything like that. But what I want to instead turn our attention to this afternoon is no longer whether how open source will play a role in automotive software, but what Europe's automotive sector should do to remain sovereign and competitive. We must move beyond questions of consumption and contribution to explore how open source technologies being led by the automotive industry can be governed, maintained, and deployed in ways that support both competitiveness and sovereignty as strategic objectives. Today's panel brings together leaders from across the automotive value chain, original equipment manufacturers navigating the software-defined vehicle transition, suppliers managing the complexity of shared platforms, open source foundations coordinating industry-wide collaboration, and technology providers developing the common tooling and frameworks that make continuous compliance possible. We will examine whether and how open source adoption is already business critical, where it remains contested, and what structural changes are needed to support collaborative development and deployment. So, I am joined today by Detlef Zurkowski. Detlef is vice president at ETAS. There, he brings deep expertise in embedded systems, functional safety, and the supplier perspective on software-defined vehicle architectures. Next, we have all the way on the third person from my left, Sarah Gallian. Sarah is Senior Manager for Software-Defined Vehicles and Automotive Programs at the Eclipse Foundation, where she coordinates collaborative projects, including Eclipse S-Core. We also have Christian Vega, all the way there at the end, Manager for Open Source Software and Continuous Compliance at Mercedes-Benz. He aligns contributions for one of Europe's leading automotive OEMs as it transitions towards shared deployment models, or development models. And finally, we have John Ellis. John is president and head of product at CodeThink, a leading provider of system-level software infrastructure. So I'm going to jump straight into our questions, but I wanted to start with a long-term kind of strategic question to help frame the discussion. How important is open source to Europe's ability to avoid long-term dependency on non-European platforms, maintain control over its automotive future, and stay competitive? Christian, I'm going to start with you. I wanted to put a little bit of a finer point on this. There's a growing sense of urgency in the automotive sector around software and software-defined vehicles. From your perspective, what is driving this urgency around digital sovereignty today, and why does it matter specifically for Europe's competitiveness to look at long-term control over its automotive software supply chain?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So if you're looking into a Mercedes-Benz vehicle, about a couple of years ago, well, we always publish the open source notices of the vehicle, of the software which is in the car. So a couple of years ago, it was only a couple hundred pages long. Today, the open source notices that just lists the licensees is a couple thousand pages long. Yeah? So that shows how dramatic the increase was about open source in the vehicles. So we are doing something about that. We have several sponsoring programs and memberships and stuff. So we're looking into that. So overall, yeah, well, we heard about yesterday at the award ceremony about this majority of open source components which are in the products and a thin layer which is on top of that. And for us, that's strategic, yeah? Like what makes a vehicle a Mercedes is happening in that top layer, and all the rest, the commodity features, that is our strategic imperative to do that in an open source way, collaborate with others. And we need to do that because of that fear competition which is coming from outside, from others. So especially with the move to electric mobility and even more software in the cars, we have to go that way. Well, even we are competing with companies that were supposed to be our fiercest competitors. We collaboratively develop with them software and publish that as open source because it's so important for us. And about this collaboration, I just wanted to highlight one thing, we talked about the CRA earlier today, and we are happy that we are sponsoring the CRA a work group at the Eclipse Foundation. Yeah, and I've been there last year. I've been there this year. If I'm looking into, and we were discussing that. So one of the white papers that was published just a couple of days ago is about what an open source steward needs to do. So that white paper is there, but one decisive element was left out. What is the definition? When are you an open source steward? And after more than a year of debate, it's still not clear. And the discussion is then also, if you do attestations and someone like the Eclipse Foundation is then trying to raise some money in order to do that voluntary attestations, well, are they still open source stewards, or are they then manufacturers and stuff? So this is really a problem for us. So we see that competition from outside and how those standards and regulations are fragmented and partly not clear. That's one of the biggest problems that you have.
John, I wanted to come to you next. So we've heard a few things from Christian, some issues around compliance, but also some questions of competition from outside. Maybe you could put a finer point on that, particularly around the competition from outside. From your perspective, is this predominantly a technology challenge, or is it really something more structural in terms of global markets, competition between firms, et cetera?
Yeah. So a comment on that is the urgency, the whole thing that's happening right now is software-defined vehicle, right? That means everyone's operating at software speed. But regulations, regulators, I mean, society operates more at a continuous need for evidence. Like, is the software still safe? 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. And so there's, it makes sense that open source finds its way in there. But I listening to today, from last year, all this week, I struggle because there is this underlying belief that you can control open source, that you can control the open source supply chain, and that is not the case. And so my guidance, to my friends here, to friends around the world is, you got to get really good at understanding provenance. You got to become expert at understanding sort of life cycle, updatability. You get good at that, and if you get good at that, if you can master that capability, then for Europe, that's where you're going to learn how to keep the value proposition. You're going to learn how to keep the revenues, et cetera, and the margin. The Eclipse Trustable Software Framework, if I put a play in there for that, I mean, it was designed to actually convert what people saw as open source dependency risk to a governed opportunity for delivering open source in a way that allows for the right ownership, but also then delivers it in a safety critical context. So going back to what Christian's saying, that's where the collaboration comes from, but that's also where the competition comes from. It is new, but you got to get really comfortable at working in that environment. Otherwise, we will never see a properly defined software-defined vehicle.
Detlef, I wanted to come to you next and maybe talk a little bit more, moving from this sovereignty perspective into the current state of play. Where are the areas where the automotive sector in Europe is doing a good job at kind of differentiating itself, and where does uptake remain limited or contested when it comes to open source?
Yeah, so perhaps first I should tell how we changed over the last 3 years. 3-4 years back, we were still in the mode which you told, John. Everybody wanted to control the entire software stack by themselves. And you all know from the press how miserably many companies failed in this context. And based on this, the industry changed their opinion, changed their position. We need to collaborate in such a manner that we can utilize a good business for the OEMs, but also for the tiers, but perhaps also for other players coming in. And establishing this new approach with the help and the support of the European Union was extremely good. So the point is, there are elements in the software stacks which scale across the industry. There are a certain amount, a huge amount of the software stack which cannot scale within one company. And we learned this in the automotive industry over the last years very hard, but we are on the good way. With the support of the European Union, with the support of the open source project, with the support of the Eclipse Foundation, and also other companies who have not been inside the automotive sector, like CodeSync. You educate us somehow how we can deliver safe software in a totally different manner as we did it earlier.
Sarah, I wanted to come into this question of collaboration. So some of the collaboration that we see, or most of the collaboration we see is happening in the context of some of these industry-wide projects. From where you sit, does what Detlef has shared match with what you've observed? And in particular, maybe you could share a little more around what you're seeing in some of these collaborative projects that are ongoing in Europe.
Well, yes, so first of all, sorry for my voice. I think I partied too hard yesterday night, so the gala was too good. So what can I say? Actually, I'm really happy to be able to work very closely with these three gentlemen and also with a lot of more members. So my role at the Eclipse Foundation is that I'm in charge of the software-defined vehicle working group. And what we do there is exactly that. So we allow these collaborations to happen. And the working group is about 3 years old, actually 3.5 almost. And what we see is that organizations that they first were contributing pieces of software by themselves. So we had projects that only had one organization working on it. Now they start to collaborate from the very beginning. And one example of that is the Eclipse software-defined, the Eclipse Safe Open Vehicle Core, which is Eclipse S-Core, which is essentially the first complete middleware package, whatever stands between the operating system and the API towards the application. So that project that is not new in terms of technology, but it is new in terms of collaboration, started with already more than 5 members on board. We had Mercedes, we had ATAS, we had BMW, we had Accenture, Quarix. They were on board from the very beginning. So I think the biggest change is really that organizations start to collaborate on projects from the very beginning and don't jump on board later, because they do realize that shared code is shared risk, and it's, of course, cost saving.
Maybe I could come back to John. So from our panel prep discussions, I got the sense that you have been arguing that collaboration often works technically, but sometimes struggles commercially. Could you explain a little bit what you mean by this, or if I'm mistaken, challenge it, add some color? What do you view as some of the successes and weaknesses of these types of collaborations?
Yeah, so, I mean, giving a +1 to Detlef, there's an absolute understanding in the industry that huge amounts, I mean, a significant amount of software has to be co-created, co-shared. It's just impossible for any one entity to do that. And I would offer that while Detlef is saying 3 or 4 years ago, it's really, this insight's been around for actually quite a while. I mean, we can go back to 2009, the Geneva Alliance announced in Switzerland, right, with OEMs and partners and others, an intent to do just this. So what we can see, though, over the years, what hasn't changed is that, unfortunately, we still don't actually have a business model that's really well understood or even well defined. I mean, for the OEMs, the value is very clear, right? Cost sharing, leverage, speed. I mean, that's understood, and we understand the why. But the other parties, suppliers, integrators, others, what are their incentives? Where is their margin? How do we do the shared accountability when working in collaborative opening? Like, none of that's actually, I would say, not defined at all. And if we think there's a definition, it's really poorly defined. And unfortunately, what that means then is all these companies treat open source really as a cost center as opposed to like a value-producing opportunity. So we don't put a business case behind it, which is unfortunate. So what I would offer is until the industry can wrap its head around that, we're going to struggle. And most of these initiatives, I think, will fall far short of their potential. I mean, this is a huge potential. There's so many brands and so much interest in what's happening here. It would be really a shame if it didn't actually succeed. But to succeed, it has to work commercially for the players, and I think that's probably right now the biggest challenge, and that's what we talk about when I say the challenge. Is it overcomable? Absolutely, I think so. We're just not there yet.
I wanted to turn it to the rest of the panel. Do you agree with what John shared, or how would you challenge it in some way?
I totally agree, but we have already a sight. We see a light at the end of the tunnel. The point is, a cost center, at least you would get money. I would state 3 years back, it was considered as free of cost, even free of cost. This has changed because open source is not free of cost. There will be business also for tiers like us as a tier 2. We see us definitely as a distributor providing liability with a serious hard and extended software stack. And there is a business. Without liability, all the customers, all the OEMs have to do all the maintenance, all the certification, functional safety certification by themselves, and it will be not cost saving. Only if it's going across the industry, all the participants in this business have a positive business case. We are absolutely convinced of this, and therefore we are investing in this, and for us it's not a cost center.
I love it. No, I know, it's
Yeah,
great.
maybe I can add something.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't sell anything, right? But what we can see is that this is where the EU public funding really can play a role. And it's not there yet. I mean, it's starting to come, and the business case is not there yet, in my opinion, at least from what I can see. And I have a completely impartial version of this. But this is where EU money are really, really important. So public money and public code. But what I think is that we should try to find a different way of allocating EU funds, which is faster and more efficient and towards producing code. So this is not so easy, but that's I think, something that also the newly started European Connected Autonomous Vehicle Alliance, ECAVA, is endeavoring to do, and so I'm really hoping to see that going forward.
Does anyone on the panel have any sense of what that funding would actually look like, or how these EU institutions could actually support the automotive sector in this way? Yeah, Christian.
Oh, yeah, that was, I have a very specific example of where things work with funding and with business model and so on. The Catena X project that was funded by the federal government in a several-year process. And that put focus on really implementation. But from day one, we were focusing on implementing that as open source. And to be able to do that collaboratively, we went to the Eclipse Foundation because that provided a framework for doing exactly that collaboration. Interestingly, the money that we got from the government was, okay, do some implementation. It was not that they said, okay, also they support the Eclipse Foundation or something. Yeah, it was like, do that implementation, and we needed to look for some safe place to do that ourselves, yeah, and which I think could become better.
Yeah, also to add, the money is not the key. The point is about 3-4 years back, when we had these first European Union Sherpa group meetings where the industry was coming together, there was a clear indication we need a little bit of support, that there is an environment where we are a little bit forced to collaborate. Because if you get some money, you have to deliver. So this was also, at the beginning, a learning session for us in the automotive industry, pushed by the European Union, and this is quite successful. And this is a way how we utilize the money. And this is beneficial.
Well, but then, and I would offer, right, that you and I have talked about this greatly, which is there is, well, open source has been around for a long period of time. There's an executive bunch within this industry and others that have never heard of it. And so they do think it's free. They don't understand that even if it's the same cost, what's the value prop though is you've removed dependencies. And so we've been asking as a UK-based company to Parliament and others in the Commission as a value proposition is the independence and the dependency management that you seek under the approach. And so teaching, educating, and making people aware that it's not free. It may even be more costly, but the cost is the independence that we seek across the board.
And finally, the final evidence will be if the open source components, the S-Core, will be in series, will running on the road. And we are on the good way on this. And if this is done, nobody can tell anymore it's not working, even on the top management.
Absolutely.
I next wanted to come to the question of bottlenecks. So when we look at kind of the software supply chain, but also the kind of value chain for getting all the way to deployment, what do you see as some of the bottlenecks for production-ready, safety-critical automotive software? Is it things like governance, certification, organizational culture, or tooling? What are the actual kind of challenges that we should be focusing our attention on, and where should we really direct resources towards?
Who? Me?
For the entire panel.
Oh,
all right, all right.
Go, Christian.
Okay, it was about, well, I want to build onto what Sarah was saying, yeah? About this S-Core just delivered version 0.5 after about a year, and we are determined to put that into vehicles. We are actively looking for new components in the vehicles that are out there on the market, that we are donating to the S-Core project, and so that we can keep developing together with others. Well, this would solve the maintenance problem. This would also solve that problem that, well, we spend so much money on commodity functions that every car needs, and I think that's the good example to go forward.
I think one challenge or bottleneck is definitely still the mindset shift. Because not in all the entire organizations, even in our organizations, sometimes there might be hiccups. The point is, if you are looking back how we operated in the past in the automotive industry, the OEMs developed the specification, the tiers waited for the specifications and did the implementation. Now, with the open source, this approach is not working anymore. Therefore, all the organizations, the decisions maker, the middle management need to shift into this new operational model that things will be developed in open source, which then should be used as it is, or it should be contributed to change it by all the players and not only by the tiers. And this is still a process which is undergoing, but it's moving forward, and this is really beneficial.
So the diffusion of the mindset change isn't fully actualized yet, you would say. John, yeah.
Well, I mean, it's the mindset change, but it's this idea like we're good to share and produce code, but then when it comes time to productionize it, like all of a sudden everyone kind of reverts back to their own teams, and this idea of shared collaboration is great, but now we got to get to shared responsibility. And I think at that's where the mind shift understanding is like, okay, great. Previously, we had very clear boundary conditions around who the OEM was, who the tier 1 to the tier 2 to the tier 3 is. And in this world of open collaboration, those boundary lines have to be redrawn. And that's not happening yet. And it will have to happen in order for this to actually go forward. And I think it will happen, but that is a hard conversation because that's not a technical conversation. Now it's lawyers, business people, procurement, it's the other parts of the business that aren't normally aware of what open source is.
It's a regulatory question now too, right? I don't know, did anybody want to come in on the regulation question?
I don't want to answer about the regulatory, but I want to say that if S-Core, actually when S-Core gets in a serious production,
when?
that is...
When?
When, that's a question for someone else. But the project started in June 2025, already has hit its first milestone. The version 1 is due by the end of this quarter. So to be honest, I mean, the time that this is in a serious vehicle, it is a safety relevant piece of software. It's not rocket science. This thing is old. The code is like nothing that is an innovation, but what is the innovation is having it in a running car. Once that is done, the doors are open.
Well, absolutely, and part of the conversation was always, and it's always shocking to us, is like open source brought human beings to the space station. Yeah. Linux is what powers the space capsule Dragon. I mean, open source is what powers Deutsche Bahn trains. Like, open source is in safety critical places. It's just not very well understood. And in the automotive industry, again, it's the boundary lines that we have previously established that have to be sort of revisited. And it is, I mean, thankfully, too, the work being done by Mercedes, BMW, others in S-Core, ETAS, Bosch, and with Eclipse, it's being made aware, but next is actually doing the hard work of trying to redraw those boundary lines.
I would want to add a few more examples about regulations and law and stuff. when we started our engagement in the Eclipse Foundation, first building the first work group, for us it was new, but also we consulted with our lawyers, and one problem was, those licensees, they all have a no warranty or a clause.
No liability.
Yeah, but according to German law, that doesn't 100% hold. So it's unimaginable how much text we were putting into the charter of that work group so that we all could feel safe. Yeah, well, that shouldn't be the case. Yeah, so that should just come noble. Another case which I learned yesterday. An open source developer, she is traveling to meet other open source developer to work commonly on a project. They did their yearly alignment on what is the architecture, what are the things that we want to do. The next year, when she came back, she got an assessment of the tax authorities. They were looking at that. Did you write an offer? Did you get a purchase order or anything? No, so this is a private engagement, so I have to gonna tax you for that, yeah? So unimaginable. So there are so many things on the regulation front that should be done.
I can add another flavor to this. If you remember the CRA, and your colleague and myself, we had been at the European Union and we spoke to the author of the initial draft of the CRA. So we influenced the CRA that it has been changed, that it's not giving so much burden to the open source community. This was a big step forward for us, also for us, because we hadn't been in this kind of discussion at that point. So we can influence, and we have to influence, regulation and decision makers. Therefore, it's so important that we are here, because there is sometimes also a misunderstanding what might be the need from the business perspective. And we, from the industry, need to understand the good intention for these regulations. And then finding the best solution can only be done together.
So I wanted to widen back out again and come back to this kind of question that we posed with the title of this session, which is focused on competitiveness and open source in the automotive industry. So we've tackled a lot of the challenges, mindset shift, regulation, maintenance. Kind of taking a step back, what would we need to most effectively support a competitive European automotive software ecosystem? There's many things: funding, procurement, standardization, regulatory clarity. Like, through an open source lens, how would we differentiate what is really good for the automotive software ecosystem as a whole, and what is good for Europe's open source companies or Europe's automotive companies in particular?
So first, we need to get it on the road. This is a competitive part. If it's getting on the road, other companies will join and also come up with their offer based on open source. If it's visible, running on the road, the competition will start.
Do you guys agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Putting it on the road is as we always like to say, code beats paper. So let's not talk about it. Let's go do it. But I think the other thing that is probably going to be needed for sure. Again, my friends know this is the provocative question that CodeThink always likes to ask, which is like, why do you trust software? I mean, software will fail us all the time. We have trillions of dollars of loss in the industry over years. The data points are very strong, but we have to figure out how to work with it. And so part of the Eclipse project, right, with Trustable is to get to a point where we can reason and rationalize so that we can put the vehicle on the road, we can answer the questions, we can answer the regulators, we can, because the regulators represent society, and society is asking, like, we're gonna have autonomous vehicles. Like, if software can crash, does the car crash? These are real serious questions, and that has to be answered. Again, part of the Eclipse effort, part of being here at the OFE, part of all of FOSDEM Week, is around that sort of, how do we get trust in the thing that we're actually trying to release?
Yeah, and in addition to that, I think TSF is perfect for open source because you already can see the code. So you cannot sell your spaghetti code to your customer just because you give it a library. So TSF is perfect because, so the trustable software framework is perfect applied to open source because you can really say, okay, I trust my software because of these reasons, following these tenets, and you can also see it. So a way of lowering the barrier and lowering the fear of using open source software in automotive is exactly that. And that's why it's so powerful.
Christian?
So we absolutely support that initiative of the European Commission, this European Open Digital Ecosystem Strategy. I just heard the information from my external affairs advisor just an hour ago. He had submitted the feedback of Mercedes-Benz to that initiative, and we heard today about 1,000 submissions to this. So that really tells the story that the open source community cares about that. It is important to do that, yeah. And I think whenever something is done here, like regulation standards and so on, I'm glad that we can talk here to policymakers on the European level. Really consider open source as one of the premier elements if you do something like that, so that we don't run into problems and Detlef doesn't have to rush through Brussels to convince guys, yeah? That must be in there from the beginning. And yes, well, earlier today we saw about two open source champions, Nextcloud, and we had, what was it, SUSE, yeah? It's totally cool to do that, and we need more champions like that. And on the other hand, well, we as Mercedes-Benz never want to be famous as being an open source champion. We want to be famous because we invented the vehicle. We want to be famous for creating the future of the vehicle. Yeah? And so the only way to do that is collaboration with our peers in the industry. And so it's not just creating open source champions, but enable collaboration, create the ecosystem for that, so that this thing can flourish. Well, when we started our open source strategy, one of our lawyers said speed needs clear rules. Yeah? And I can only emphasize that. Emphasize on clear. Yeah? So not just overregulate, but it must be clear what we can do. Thanks.
Do you see the movement happening around a new open source software strategy in Europe being able to give some clarity to that for the automotive industry? Or what is your kind of view of this current moment that we're facing in the open source software ecosystem?
We can definitely see that it's picking up. I personally, over the last months, get calls from all over the world, from within the Bosch group. They wanted to know, hey, what's happening there in Europe? What is the European Union doing? What is the industry doing? What is the Eclipse doing? So we even went to locations beyond Europe. We had these open events in Japan. We have been in South Korea. Even the US are asking. So there is a strong momentum, which you can also see with the Memorandum of Understanding, which was initially coming from the VDA, from the German Automotive Society or Association, which has now been pushed towards the Eclipse, and the Eclipse took it over. And on the CES at Las Vegas, we got 12 additional signatories on this Memorandum of Understanding for collaboration in the open source. Even ESCO is mentioned there, from all over the world. And therefore, it's picking up. So who is not in should hurry up.
Did any of you want to add any points on that, or?
Yes, so my work, so the STV working group, the Eclipse STV working group, yes, started in Europe, but it's been expanding. And exactly one example is what Detlef mentioned. The first Memorandum of Understanding was basically only European organizations. And just after that, we went on a long tour where we went to Japan and South Korea. And then finally, we landed in Las Vegas in January with the second edition. And this is one thing, so because what we do, we want it to be global, but it is European-led. And this is what I see. It's really happening in the way the committers push code, in the way that the projects are adopted, and where do we do our meetups. So I'm actually very proud of what's happening lately, because we started it in Europe, but now we truly see that we are expanding. And I think what's extremely important is that Europe keeps this leadership position, a leadership role, and the fear of missing out is an extremely important motivator.
So I wanted to start wrapping up by coming back to this question that I posed at the beginning of the panel, which is, how important is open source to Europe's ability to avoid long-term dependency on non-European platforms, maintain control over its automated future, and stay competitive We've tackled many different aspects of this topic, but I wanted to do a classic kind of closing question and see if I could get you all to kind of reflect on what you think is one or two of the most key priorities and things that we should be focusing on over the next year until we can talk about this all again next year. So maybe we could start with you, Detlef.
Without open source, the entire industry will miserably fail. It's as simple as this. If we are not doing it, we will be bulldozed by others.
And plus oneing on exactly that, the next step then is to do it in a trustable way so that we can begin to, deliver with a level of confidence, but then more importantly, be able to give the evidence and claims continuously to others. We shouldn't be in a position where we can't answer the question why, when, where, and what at any given time in the life of the vehicle.
Well, I think we need a win. We need a project in series, and that needs to be in a safety domain way with open source, not just because it's a nice story, but because we really trust that this software is good.
Christian?
To make it short, foster collaboration in the industry, and to do that, collaborate with the open source community. If you want to really learn how that does, on Monday, go to the video stream of this event and skip forward to the speech of Mike Milinkovic from the Eclipse Foundation and listen to that. And if that agenda is executed, we are much better.
Well, I wanted to give you all one last opportunity to offer any final remarks. Is there any aspect of what we talked about today that you don't think that we covered? Anything that you think is most important for a sovereign and competitive automotive sector in Europe?
Well, I would offer one. I know many people have said it. Mike says it often, which is, to say work with open source is to potentially suggest that there is a thing or an entity called open source. But open source is both a philosophy and an approach. But more importantly, the communities are as diverse as society. There's not a single open source community, right? And so, being aware that that this is society coming together to try and advance a shared view, in this case it's the society of the automotive industry, I think is a very important perspective, because that's how we then start to move the business conversation and the legal conversation.
And don't underestimate the effort to convince middle management, education goes on.
That's a good lesson for all of us, I think, and it's applicable across many industries. Well, I wanted to end things there and make sure that we stay on time for the rest of our discussions and get you off to drinks on a timely manner. So please give a round of applause for all of our panelists and thank them for joining us on stage today.